Yes.
Okay. So anyway, the four types of aviation aerial photography. Ground to ground is the obvious one. You're on the ground, the airplane's on the ground. So we have a C5A here on the left, San Carlos Airport, the ramp on the right. Ground to ground in Alaska. This is a J3 Cub with in Talkeetna, Alaska, with its pilot and two passengers. This was Reed Dennis's Grumman Albatross, which now sits in the Hiller Aviation Museum. It's one of our primary attractions. Reed donated this to the museum, I believe, back in 2012. And we'll show a little more of that later on. This was its actually last exit from the runway as it landed after its last flight in San Carlos. Another view outside the fence from San Carlos, the airport here. Final approach of the Albatross as it came in. Typical military jet flybys. Ground to air shooting. UH-1 Iroquois, or the Hueys. And this was a ground to air shot that took me about a year to execute. It's the runway light, or the approach light patterns of commercial airplanes coming into San Francisco International Airport. And it took a number of things to finally come together, including the weather, a moon rising, landing aircraft only for a period of 20 minutes without aircraft taking off and leaving streaks over the rest of the sky in the foreground. This is one of those that requires a bit of patience and perseverance. This was shot back in 1989. Unfortunately, this location up on the hillside above San Francisco Airport is now completely blocked by trees, which have grown up in the meantime. I've been meaning to go back and try to do it again digitally, because this was shot on 4x5 film originally, just to see if it can be done a little bit better or improve it somehow. But anyway, it's a fun and creative way to approach photographing aircraft. This is a pilot named Dan Buchanan, who some of you may have seen at air shows. He's a paraplegic hang glider pilot who would do air shows, get towed up to about 3,000 feet from the back of a pickup truck on a long cable, and then he'd release and then fly his air show routine. Unfortunately, Dan died, I think it was about 2 years ago, in an accident. But I had the good fortune of photographing him for an assignment for ALPA Pilot magazine. And it was just a great guy to meet, and this is another great way to photograph aircraft from the ground if you can get close enough and be involved in the activity. This was one of Hiller's vertical challenges air shows, where we actually organized, I was on assignment for Air and Space Smithsonian magazine, and organized a group hover of the 4 different Piasecki tandem rotor design aircraft. So this happened again right at San Carlos Airport. Jeff, you may know which of these aircraft are which. I know there's a Chinook over on the far right-hand side and a Hup on the far left. And I can't remember the other two.
Well, I recognize the Flying Banana, but that's the only one.
Yeah, okay. Willie will probably know these better. But anyway, it was a very fun shoot to organize, and we can talk a little bit more later on about how you deal with coordinating aircraft in flight together in formation like this. This is back from the days when the Blue Angels flew the A4. So it was quite some time ago. Shot from the end of the runway with it flying towards me. More Hiller Museum activities, vertical challenge, and the Go Fast jetpack pilot. That was Eric Scott, I think, who was there. Did a number of demonstrations for us. My favorite type of aerial photography is probably air to ground. This is the most common. In this case, this is the San Francisco International Airport, the departure of runway 1 right, I believe. Um, and I love it because it's easier to do than air to air work, but there's so many more subjects to be able to shoot as well. This is, again, San Francisco Airport, and this is one of the rare instances of being able to get a good photograph through the window of a commercial airliner. I was accused online when I posted this of flying a drone in Class B airspace over San Francisco Airport because everybody thought it was shot too low. It was too low to be in an aircraft. But I actually was in a commercial aircraft and it was landing. And sometimes if you try these enough, they work out okay. But this is, you know, hold short and or taxi and hold short on runway 28 right. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my screen there. There we go. San Francisco from a general aviation airplane, showing downtown and the Bay Bridge with Mount Diablo in the background. Most of you will recognize this as an older skyline. Our skyline in San Francisco has changed significantly since then with a number of new high-rises that have gone up.
Scott, is that open window or through a window or open cockpit?
Yeah, it's open window. I shoot as much aerial work as I can, either through an open door or an open window of the airplane. Unfortunately, in general aviation airplanes, the plexiglass that they use for the windscreens and all has some really bad optical artifacts and color shifts. So I will usually release the stop, like if I'm flying a 172 or in a 172, a Cessna, I'll release the window stop so it will open all the way up up against the wing, and it gives me a little bit of a larger shooting area through, and it gives you much better color and focus and saturation, etc. This is the Altamont Pass Wind Farm. Again, for those of you that are familiar with the area, it's a bit dated because all of those windmills are old technology now, and they've been replaced with much newer and larger ones. So it's construction of the Apple spaceship campus, construction process photos. It's amazing how huge that building is, even from the air. In San Francisco International Airport, that's the international terminal on the left, and runway 1 on the right with the commercial aircraft taxiing into place. Again, San Francisco downtown, and you can see this is the Salesforce Tower that's under construction over on the right-hand side in front of the bridge. You can see the Transamerica Pyramid on the left and the Bank of America building on the near left. And I think this is some bridge in the San Francisco area. Some of you may know which one it is.
I've heard of it.
I was given an assignment by AOPA Pilot Magazine, another one, to illustrate a story they were doing on runway incursions. And they wanted an airport, they wanted to show some activity in an airport that was kind of confusing for a lot of general aviation pilots to fly in and out of. And Buchanan Field up in Concord, up north of San Francisco to the northeast, was an ideal one because you can see they've got 4 runways, 2 sets of parallel runways, plus all the accompanying taxiways and ramps. And so we shot this both from the air and the ground. You know, we set up some airplanes on the ground next to the runway aprons and all. But again, air to ground stuff is just fun. It's such a unique perspective that you get from the air. And here in the Bay Area and throughout most of the US actually are just so fortunate to be able to fly and photograph in places that you might not even have access to on the ground. We have beautiful scenery and wonderful iconic locations that it doesn't really take anything to fly over other than an aircraft and perhaps a flight plan and clearance from ATC, none of which is terribly hard to get. I know in other countries it's quite difficult to even get an airplane in the air because of all the regulations and where you can fly it is far more restricted. So we truly feel blessed, pilots in the Bay Area, to be able to fly where we can and in such a spectacular environment. This is the Hangar 1 down at Moffett Federal Airfield. Used to be Moffett Naval Air Station. This is the one that's had its skin stripped off it a number of years ago to remove all the asbestos and pollution. And I think there are still plans in the process for recovering it, but it sits as a skeleton right now. On the left is another one of those rare photographs of a glory, which is that rainbow around the shadow of the airplane, that you can actually photograph successfully from a commercial aircraft window. So they don't happen too often, but when they do, they're fun. It's worth it to keep trying. And of course, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco in the distance. Sutro Tower on the left, again in San Francisco, and Transamerica Pyramid on the right. Legion of Honor on the west coast of San Francisco with Ocean Beach in the background. That's Point Lobos and the old Sutro Baths on the left. And on the right was while we had just switched over to the new eastern span of the Bay Bridge going into Oakland. So you can still see the old span that had partially collapsed during our earthquake back in '89. It was still in place. It's gone now, but it was an interesting juxtaposition while the two were actually in place, and shows very well from the air. Excuse me. San Francisco and Golden Gate Bridge from the Marin Headlands. And that is the South Beach Harbor in San Francisco with the boats. And that big boat or ship is the USS Nimitz, I believe, shot during Fleet Week. It was interesting, when I shot that, I had gotten in touch with NorCal Air Traffic Control the day prior, just to find out what the regulations were over flying over an active aircraft carrier. Wanted to make sure we didn't get in any trouble on that. And they basically told me, well, give us a call on the radio when you're in the area, and we'll let you know where you can be. But there were no restrictions at all, other than the normal, minimum altitudes that you do over a populated area. And so when we were actually in the air and in the area as the ship was about to come under the Golden Gate Bridge, we were in touch with NorCal, and they said, well, we've got you on radar. We have 13 other aircraft in the area, in your area, and you're the only one who's actually talking to us. So it was a little bit surprising, because you expect in a busy airspace like that to have the other pilots actually talking to air traffic control. They weren't required to, but we had to do a lot of, there were a lot of eyes on the horizon looking for other aircraft as we were shooting this. Alcatraz Islands, very popular subject. And of course, if you go beyond the Bay Area, you have, spectacular locations such as Yosemite, not too far away. These are different variations of Half Dome in Yosemite National Park, different seasons. Now we get into air-to-air, which again is one of the more fun ways to shoot aviation, but it's definitely a more difficult and technical way. So this is a Kristen Eagle shot over Steamboat Springs, Colorado. These were some of my first air-to-air shoots, or shots, I think I did. And air-to-air can also include inside the aircraft. So in this case, on the left is Reed Dennis, who was the man who donated the Hiller Museum's Grumman Albatross, and that's him actually flying the Albatross up over Lake Tahoe. And on the right is Chuck Lodwick, who was the builder and the pilot of that Kristen Eagle, as we're doing some aerobatics. Oops, and I went the wrong way, sorry. Reed Dennis, Albatross donor, also has a number of other aircraft he flew, including an almost identically painted Grumman Mallard. And I first saw this airplane at sitting on the ramp at the airport, and I went and put a card in it and in the door and introduced myself. And within a couple of weeks, Reed had agreed to give me an afternoon with the airplane, and we did an air-to-air shoot and shot a variety of different locations and positions. But he's a very generous guy, very helpful to pilots and others.
Scott, what were you flying and taking these pictures?
On this one, I believe I was in a mall with the rear door removed. And that's really nice because when you have a door removed, you actually have a lot of view that you can, it's not just one tiny little narrow view out a window that's clear. You can shoot forward and backward and all. So it was a very nice camera platform. So there are a number of aerial photography concerns, and of course, as you all can guess, the three most important ones are safety. And I'm going to show a little example here of why this is important. This is off the web, and somebody who's trying to do some aerial pictures out a window. I don't know how many of you caught that, but that camera got sucked right out the window.
Looked like a GoPro.
No, I think it was a little handheld one. And I want to go back and just review a few things real quickly. First of all, if you look around, you see there are two perfectly good shoulder harnesses that are not in use here. There's also two should be perfectly good headrests that are not in place, not here. These are safety factors. And if we can go back to the actual loss of the camera, if I can get it right, sorry. Bear with me a moment. You will see there's a perfectly good wrist strap on that camera as it flies away. So, in this case, I sort of blame the pilot on it. Again, I don't know these people. I don't know, what the situation was. But the pilot's responsible for all these things. If he's allowing a passenger to photograph out a window that opens in the airplane, he should be, looking out for what's going on. A camera that size, a cell phone, a GoPro, anything like that, falling from 1,000 feet or more up in the air will literally kill anybody that it hits on the ground, and it will certainly damage property if it hits it. Fortunately, in this case, it looks like they are flying over a desert, so there's probably nobody on the ground and nothing really to damage.
Well, it could have struck the rear of the aircraft. I mean,
yes, could have done that. Could have struck the tail as well. So there are safety really has to be your number one priority when you're doing aerial photography. But some of the other things that I look at, or the photographers look at, are when the time of day that you're shooting. You'll notice there's a difference between most of the photographs that a lot of pilots take of their flights and what professional pilots do. We tend to, or professional photographers, we tend to rely on things called the magic hours, which are the hour after sunrise and the hour before sunset, because that's when the light on the ground is the prettiest. It's the sun is low in the sky, the shadows are long, the contrast is lowered. So we'll generally fly, early morning or late in the evening. You also can get much calmer winds and air during the morning hours. So we look for that. You have to look at other weather conditions. You want to make sure you've briefed everybody who's involved properly, as most pilots do with their normal flying. You plan your flight and then you fly the plan. You try not to deviate from that unless necessary. We have, when you're doing air-to-air work, we set up what we call break patterns. So if you have the aircraft that's on the left, if something goes wrong or they decide something's unsafe, the aircraft will separate from each other, and one has to know that they always brake to the left and upward, and the other will brake to the right and downward, so there's no chance of them crossing over in the emergency. I also have a 3 strikes rule, which is based on the foundation that in most aircraft accidents, the accident is not caused by a single catastrophic failure or a single major thing going wrong. It's a bunch of little things that sort of build up on each other and snowball until they cause something big to go on or to break. So what I do, and I've learned this from a number of instructors, is if you have little things that aren't quite going right, you discover you've got a cargo door that didn't latch, or a radio that didn't work. And yes, you can fly with one radio, but the other one didn't. These are little strikes that you say. And if you have 3 of them in a row, even after you're off the ground, it's time to abort the mission and come back another day, because you're just asking for trouble. So a lot of pilots have that rule, and they'll stick with it as well. If you're running the camera ship, which most photographers are, and you're flying in it or you're flying it yourself, you want to make sure you can open your window or a door, or it may be open all the time. The door may be removed, but you want to set that up ahead of time and know that it works. You want to make sure that your photographer is secured inside the ship. It's really bad to have photographers leave the ship during the shoot, as well as securing equipment. You want to set up your communications system beforehand. Most of the time we'll use just headsets, the regular intercom headsets. But when you have a window open or a door missing, there's a lot of wind that's blowing through the airplane or the helicopter, and it will just make nothing but wind noise on your microphone and the headset. So you need to set up a backup system of hand signals, or be able to close the window when you talk, etc. And just how you're going to communicate with each other. Barf bags, the obvious one. You should have those. A lot of people forget them. Hopefully you won't use them, but sometime you will. And then, identify what your subject is, where it's going to be, how big it is, how far away you need to be, or how close you need to be to it. For the photographer yourself, if you're the one shooting, you want to make sure you're healthy, you're fed, and you're hydrated before you get in the airplane. Also use the bathroom before you go. It's really embarrassing to have to turn a mission around because somebody needs to use the bathroom again. Barf bag again. If you're using cameras or multiple lenses, if you need multiple lenses, do not change those lenses while you're in the airplane flying, because all that air blowing around means that you're going to get dust on your digital sensor and all. So if you need to have multiple lenses, if you can't just use one zoom lens, make sure you have 2 cameras or 2 or more cameras, each with their own lens on, and then switch back and forth. Otherwise, you will spend the rest of your week retouching dust out of all the images that you shot. Make sure you've tested your equipment and it's all working ahead of time. Make sure it's all attached to you or to the airplane. And one of the last things I like to do is, in my pre-flight briefing, is I'll talk to the pilot, if it's somebody other than me, and give them the authority to say no to anything I ask them. When you're a photographer or when you're shooting, you tend to focus 100% on creating the image in the viewfinder and setting it up. And so you're not always thinking of the other safety issues. So if I ask, I want a pilot to know, if I ask you to do something you're even slightly uncomfortable with, you can tell me no. You don't have to tell me why, just tell me no, I can't do that, or I'm not comfortable with that. You know, if I'm asking for a 45-degree bank and we're flying at slow airspeed, that's not necessarily a safe thing, but I may not be thinking of that as I'm asking the pilot to get me in that position. So give them, reiterate that authority. They know they have that, but when you're a commercial pilot and you've got a paying client in the aircraft with you, you often want to please them. So I want to make sure that they're not trying to please me in a way that will get us killed. Pilots have the same, I like to do the same checklists with them, make sure they're healthy, fed, and hydrated. We go through their normal pre-flight briefing with you know, the routes and altitudes, FARs, et cetera, what our distances are going to be if we're in formation. I give each aircraft pilot the authority to say no. You identify who's who in the formation work, whether you're lead, subject, or chase aircraft. And then for formation work, if you haven't done it before, it's easy to learn, but it does take practice. And obviously, as a photographer, you should never be piloting an aircraft and trying to take pictures in formation at the same time. Both require 100% attention, and so you need separate people doing those. We generally, most air-to-air formation work is done at a fairly healthy distance. You know, you watch the Blue Angels or some of the other performance teams and you figure, oh gosh, they're just, you know, within feet of each other, and that's what formation flying is. It's really not. You can get wonderful air-to-air photographs of other aircraft if they're 100 feet away from you. And if you want more room than that, use a slightly longer lens. So, you know, don't worry about the distance. Make sure it's comfortable and that all of the motions by all pilots are slow, so nobody's doing anything abruptly. And again, if anybody does that, and anybody in any of the aircraft involved is starting to feel uncomfortable with what they've seen, every person involved in the mission has the right to say no or to call on the board. So make sure that safety stays your priority. Make sure you have a good way to communicate between aircraft. Usually the radios work pretty well, but again, when you have wind blowing through the cockpits, sometimes the microphones get muffled. So hand signals can be good for signaling another pilot to come 10 feet closer or 10 feet you know, further away. You set all that up ahead of time. You know, a thumbs up means I need you to go 10 feet upward. Thumbs down means, you know, 10 feet lower, maybe 20 feet, you know, but you set all that up ahead of time. And again, get your brake patterns set up as well. We do have some specialty equipment that we use for aerial air-to-air work. And one of these is a gyro stabilizer. This is what allows photographers to shoot at very slow shutter speeds that allow the blur of that propeller arc on prop planes. And that it keeps the camera steady with the aircraft that you're photographing moving along next to you, but because the propeller is moving and the shutter speed is slow, you can get that nice blurred arc. Otherwise, you just have a slow shutter speed and everything winds up getting blurred because of the vibration of the aircraft. So these stabilizers usually cost several $1,000s. The bigger ones are 8 to 10, but they're worth their weight to the professional photographer and their cost for the ability. Other things to do: make sure you remove any lens hoods. They're going to blow off the camera if you leave them on, so stow them before you ever take the camera out. Keep the lens and the camera inside the airplane so it's not out in the slipstream. That just adds to vibration. Try to rest the camera on your body so you can absorb any airplane or aircraft vibrations. Helicopters are the worst. Fixed wings are much smoother, but they still vibrate a lot. So make sure you don't let the side of the camera or the lens actually touch the window or the airframe itself. And then, as hard as it is, avoid looking through the viewfinder too much, because that's what makes you nauseous and gets you airsick. Subject to camera camera to subject distances are a big thing in aerial photography. This is just an illustration of how this image degrades the more air you shoot through. All air has suspended particles in it. So if you're shooting through a mile or 2 miles of air between you and your subject, you get an image that looks like that one on the right, which has got softer focus and less color saturation, whereas the one on the left is only shot from a half-mile away. This is El Capitan in Yosemite, one shot from the ground, the other looks like it's shot from the air, but it's actually shot from the ground on the other side of the Yosemite Valley, about 2 miles away, which is about what an aerial shot of it might be. In a place like a national park, there are restrictions on how close you can fly or how low you can fly over these things. So be courteous about that and follow those. But the closer you can get, usually the better. But again, you have to make sure that safety is your priority. You don't want to be risking flying too low and doing maneuvers, circling maneuvers that are likely to put you into a stall if you're not careful. My favorite setup, or my standard setup, is usually flying a 172, Cessna 172. I'll generally, over congested and uncongested areas, fly at those respective altitudes. I open the window, I remove the window stop so that the window opens all the way. I'll set my airspeed, I'll slow down to between 90 and 100 knots, and then I'll trim for a 30-degree bank and then just set up the turn before I start shooting. And then the plane literally flies a stable turn around the point or the subject. And I can be looking through the viewfinder for 3 to 5 seconds, then looking back at the instruments and all. It's much better if you have somebody else in the airplane to help fly it. But sometimes you do it alone. But just make sure everything's stable and set up properly before you release your eyes from the cockpit in the airplane to look through the viewfinder. One of the last things we'll talk about is lighting conditions. This again is that eastern span of the Bay Bridge here in San Francisco during the construction process. And it's, as a photograph, you know, it's satisfactory. It documents the scene. It looks okay, but it's nothing spectacular. And that's because of the lighting. It was a flat, overcast day. Even though it was the end of the day, it should have been pretty, sunset light. But this day it wasn't. But on a different day, it was much better. So you have to choose when and where you're shooting and what directions your lighting are coming from. But that lighting condition makes a huge difference in the quality of the imagery you get. Same thing of the San Francisco International Airport Terminal, or the International Terminal. You know, this is a view from, for those of you who are pilots, the Class Bravo transition along the Bay Shore Freeway. You fly right over this on most of your Class Bravo transitions, and this is from about 1,000, 1,200 feet. It documents it, it shows it well, but it's not a terribly exciting photograph. Whereas when you get better lighting conditions on a different day, different time, it looks much better. If the lighting is really bad on the day you want to shoot outside, shoot inside. Go for the interiors of the airplanes. These are pretty interesting too, a lot of them. You get details and cockpit shots and cabin shots. Another way that I've actually spent about the last 20, 25 years shooting virtual reality imagery, which is 360-degree panoramic work. And this is a great way to show aircraft interiors. I have sort of made a specialty in my career of doing this. And one example is in the, let me see if I can bring this up properly. This is the interior of that Grumman Albatross that Reed Dennis donated to the museum. And with VR, with 360-degree virtual reality, you can zoom in, you can look around, you can zoom out, look overhead. And you'll see these links, these little dots that you can click on that will take you to another viewpoint. So if we want to go from the cockpit into the galley area of this beautiful Albatross, you just click on that. And see another part of the aircraft. I can go down to midship, go down to the aft area where there's a lavatory or a head. You can look around. There are information links that I put in these that you click on and they give you a caption information about what you're looking at, so you can scroll through those. And you can head back to the cockpit if you want. And in this instance, because this aircraft is in the Hiller Museum, it's a part of an entire tour of the full museum itself. So you can click through a window and exit to the gallery, where there are all sorts of other aircraft to take a look at. And again, you can, that was the Albatross there. Look around here. Go over to the Google Sky Portal, which is a very elaborate Google Earth setup where you can go anywhere on Earth and see what it looks like in a panoramic view. The museum has a very nice FMX flight simulator, a full motion flight simulator. You can go inside that. This is actually our CEO, Jeff, who's giving a demonstration in there. You can head back out. And basically there are probably, I think we have 65 or 70 locations around the museum in and outside of it that you can tour. And it's really nice, particularly now when the museum is unable to be open, for people to come in and do a tour of the museum without having to pay to get in, or without having to
Pay to get
be able to do it while it's closed. So for that, that's pretty much all I have. For those of you who are interested in more, I have a little handout that that I give. It's a 4-page sort of summary of techniques and methods for photographing aircraft in particular. And I usually hand that out as a printed copy at talks, but you're welcome to download it at this, this PDF file. It's 4 pages at the address that you see there. So I'm open for any questions you guys have. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Scott. You did a really good job giving us a sense for what you do and how you go about the business of shooting from the sky. Somebody asked a question in the chat, and you actually addressed it, but maybe you could elaborate on it a little bit more, which is, how often do you actually do these shoots just by yourself solo? So you're operating the aircraft and the camera at the same time. Sounds like a pretty challenging prospect.
It is, and it's something that I was very reluctant to do early on. In fact, I remember going to a presentation probably 30 or 40 years ago by another local Bay Area photographer, aviation photographer, who was talking about how he basically flew all of his missions alone. He owned his own airplane and flew them. And I really challenged him on that because I was a relatively new pilot, and that seemed like a pretty unsafe thing to do. And his response was, you get to the point where you're comfortable enough with your airplane and how it flies, and that you can stabilize it to do the things you want. So basically you can let go of the controls and it will continue on its, they're very well trimmed, and it will continue on its flight path without too much attention, at least for 5 to 10 seconds. And so I found that as I got more experience as a pilot, and I'm not by no means a deeply experienced pilot, but that when you fly the same airplane all the time or same aircrafts, that you become more comfortable. You're in normal flight, you look down at a chart, or you're spending time looking away from the controls, looking at charts or looking at instruments or whatnot. And I'm actually more of a hands-on, eyes outside the airplane type of pilot than some of the newer, younger ones who spend most of their time looking at moving map displays and instruments. So I really like seeing what's going on outside the window, and I'm gotten my photography technique refined enough that I can shoot a good series of images, a burst, in 3 to 5 seconds. So I'm not looking away or letting go of the yoke for terribly long when I do it. And when I do, then I quickly look back, I make sure everything's in control, airspeed's still where I want it to be, that the bank or the level is still where it needs to be, and that nothing's changing on me. If something, if the plane suddenly starts climbing or descending in those 3 to 5 seconds, I can quickly recover it and correct it at that point. So it's a comfort thing, I believe, and I just have a point where I'm comfortable enough to do that in many instances. There are some where I'm not. If I'm, for instance, our restrictions for VFR flight or altitude restrictions are that we have to be at least 500 feet over semi-populated areas. That's our minimum for flying over. And at that level, that's too low for me. Even 500 or 600 feet is too low for me to let go of anything in the airplane. If I'm at 1,000 feet, I'm more comfortable letting go of the yoke for 3 to 5 seconds, looking out the window to the side for a little bit longer. But I think you build your own comfort level on that. As the percentage of time that I do it, I probably do it more than 50% of the aerial shoots that I do. If I'm doing a commercial assignment, I almost always will hire, in fact, I could say I always hire another pilot to come along, a commercial pilot to come along and fly it for me. I may fly some of the time also because I can log some hours that way, but I want somebody else in the airplane. When the focus has to be on getting the shots, I want somebody else who's focusing 100% on making sure the airplane's flying properly.
So Scott, when you're shooting the ground, obviously a high wing airplane like a Cessna 172 or any other high wing is desirable. Shooting air to air, when do you want the high wing and when do you want the low wing? I mean, is it easier to shoot out a low wing airplane and compose a shot? Or how do you deal with the choice of airplane when you're doing
I prefer the high wings for both. But that having been said, I will take whatever is available. If you're having an assignment or something you need to shoot at a particular location and the only thing that's available is a low wing, but you can remove a door or a window, I'll be in that plane in a flash.
Are you assuming too that you're going to crop the image no matter what you do? I mean, if you get a piece of your platform aircraft in the way, you'll just crop that out.
No, I don't, because your best photography is done by doing it properly in camera. And when you start cropping things, you start magnifying errors, other errors like, soft focus or vibration blurs. And so usually I will do some cropping. I don't have a problem with cropping, but generally I will shoot with a digital camera with a zoom lens so I can frame the subject properly in camera. So I'm seeing it the way I want it in the viewfinder and then going that way. I should add, I do some work in helicopters also. I would never, I don't even have any loggable time in the helicopter in the cockpit, but I would never let go of anything in a helicopter as a pilot. I know some pilots do, but it's just a much less stable platform to fly from as a pilot. It's great. They're great platforms for aerial photography, but they're also more expensive than traditional fixed wing aircraft.
I know most of what you were talking about was regular still photography, but as far as videography is concerned, how do you shoot out the cockpit window without getting the annoying strobing effects of the prop in front of you? Is that a frame rate thing or an exposure shutter speed thing for the video?
Yeah, it's video is a whole different ball game, and there are a lot of similarities, but it's, excuse me, just a moment.
That's not me.
Sorry about that.
Somebody just got hung up on.
Yeah, a couple people did. Sorry, I think it's probably those sales calls that come in around dinner time. Video is a different ball game. There are whole different areas you have to deal with in terms of camera stabilization and the ability to pan and move the camera viewpoint. The strobing effect of the propeller is actually caused by a high shutter speed or effective shutter speed on the GoPros or the digital cameras that people are using. And the best solution to that, I think, are what they call propeller filters, which sounds really strange, but basically these are neutral density filters that block a bunch of the light. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So they block a bunch of the light that comes into the camera lens, and the camera compensates for that by slowing down the shutter speed. And when you slow the shutter speed down, then that means that propeller, as it's moving by, becomes blurred.
Right.
So that gets rid of that, or can be very effective in it. When I first heard about it, I thought, boy, that's kind of a crock, but it does work pretty well. And you do lose some of the brightness that you have in your scene. So they're not great for if you're shooting on an overcast day. You know, they might darken the scene a little bit too much for the camera to compensate. But for the most part, if you're out on a sunny day, they seem to work pretty well. And they're filters that don't have any color change to them. So it's a neutral color change. And so it's just density that they're adding to it.
Okay. I think we got one more question and then we'll wrap it up, but it comes from John Keenan, who's sitting out there, and he's asking if your operations when you're filming are Part 91 or 135.
When I'm shooting, it's Part 91. If I'm doing commercial work and I'm renting a plane and a pilot, I think that's Part 135. And don't quote me on that because I can never remember the difference between Part 61, 135, all the different part numbers that the FAA has. I just know that as a private pilot, I'm flying under Part 91.
Well, I think we're reaching the end of our time. Let's wrap things up with one last question from Ron Ruggles, which is, what sort of portfolio do you need and how do you develop contacts to shoot on assignment? This is just, this is just being out there for decades, getting work when you can find it, I suppose.
Yeah, that's it's a good question, and I hate to say this, but the professional photography industry or business today is certainly far different than it was when I got into it, and it's very difficult for anybody to make a living in almost any aspect of professional photography today. That doesn't mean you can't still do it and do it really well and still make money at it, but it's tough to be able to make a living at it. There certainly are exceptions, and there are some people who do it, but I would hate to encourage anybody to just go out and get an expensive camera and start flying a lot and shooting a lot on spec in order to get a portfolio. The way you get a portfolio or build one, the best way is to make friends with pilots, because pilots love to, they love to fly. They also love to have pictures of their aircraft and of themselves. So you can do that. And if they have interesting aircrafts, they like that even more. But you can do it slowly. I think I started out, my first aviation images were from air shows and things. I worked on a newspaper back on the East Coast for a while, and I went up on my first, one of my first small airplane rides with an aerobatic pilot at an aerobatic contest. I think it was one of the EAA aerobatic contests that was local. And I was covering it for the newspaper, and so I got invited, I wrangled my way inside an airplane to do some interior shots, and then in another airplane to do some formation work. And so, you kind of do what you can, you get what you can, you meet the people that you can, go to air shows, shoot what you can there, because there are lots of different aircraft there. Those will come back one of these days after our coronavirus is over. So don't despair on that. And just, if you hang out, if you go to EAA meetings or go to, connect with people at museums and whatnot. Sort of start small and easily and cheaply, where you don't have to spend a lot of money renting a $600 an hour helicopter to do some aerial work. See if you can get rides with people, explore some of the ways, that you can work with them. Sometimes people will be happy to take you up in their aircraft because you're helping them out, helping them wash it or helping them do maintenance or just because you're a nice guy or a nice gal. So, make those connections and you want to be a good photographer first. So work on your photography skills, make sure you are a good photographer so that when somebody, extends to you the time in the airplane or with them, that they're not disappointed, that they're not just getting snapshots that anybody can shoot. So give those a try. There's no one right way that everybody does this. Every professional photographer I know got into it a different way. They all found their own routes to it.
Sounds like good advice. Sounds like a bit of hustling is always involved in these things.
Yeah.
So, Scott, I would like to thank you for being our guest tonight. We've learned a lot about photographing aircraft. And if you would like to, those of us in the audience, show our appreciation by giving Scott a hand clap or a thumbs up using the reaction button at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. You can let him know what you thought about his presentation, and it was very interesting.
Yeah.
I should also like to let you all know that Scott is right now launching a pretty extensive site called Virtual Yosemite, which is using his virtual 360 panoramic virtual photography and gives you a pretty breathtaking experience going through all of Yosemite. So I'm plugging that for Scott.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go on Google and just Google it, Virtual Yosemite, and you'll be able to find it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight. And again, I'd like to thank our Hangar Talk sponsor, Provident Credit Union, for being our sponsor for these talks. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks for our guest on September 23rd, Dr. Chinmay Patel, and Aircraft Home Building 101. So until then, I'd like to thank you for coming and stay safe, everyone, and have a great week. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Good to see everybody. Bye.